It can be a challenge to remain as patient as we'd like to be in relationships, especially if a specific person triggers us again and again. This video is about relationship patience and how to get better at it so that you, the other person, and the relationship can thrive from the nourishment of your mutual understanding and support. Hey everyone, and welcome to Becoming an Expert at Self-Leadership, a channel dedicated to sharing information that supports you in guiding yourself through life and towards contentment with ease. My name is Maika. I'm a psychologist, and for quite some time now, the most viewed video on this channel has been my video on the psychology of patience. So it's likely that you've seen it also, unless this is your first video that you're watching on this channel. In that case, welcome. And in that video, I discuss 3 types of patience: daily hassles patience, life hardships patience, and relationship patience. Recently, I was asked if I could expand more on relationship patience, and judging from the comments beneath that video, that's a big part of the reason why people are interested in becoming patient. So sure, I'd love to expand on that. Let's dive right in. The first thing that I want to ask you is if patience is really what you need in this relationship. I will definitely get to talking about that in a moment. I just want to make sure that you're not asking something of yourself that could potentially harm you, that you're not taking on too much responsibility in this relationship. We can also be too patient or patient in the wrong situations. We wouldn't call it that. We would say that someone's exposing themselves to harmful situations, that someone's being passive or self-sacrificing. This applies when a relationship is toxic and someone's taking advantage of you on any level, financially, emotionally, physically, and they're not willing to change. They may even be willing to talk about it, but not take your perspective seriously enough to actually change. And in that case, patience is not what you need. In that case, it would be a lot better to reflect on the future of that relationship, have some honest and serious thoughts about the relationship. And it would also be good to practice setting boundaries and effective communication. I will link my playlist about boundaries in this video and also in the description box below this video. Now, for the case that you want to improve your relationship patience, which can also be very real and necessary, what's very important is to become more flexible in the way you look at the situation and relationship. What I mean by flexible is that we all walk through life with our own perspective. That includes the programming from our past and our own projections. And in that way, we are bringing things into relationships that have nothing to do with the other person or the relationship, but that may be burdening the relationship and may be a reason for our own impatience. And usually we're not aware of that. Usually our own perspective is the way we experience life, and we experience our own perspective to be fact. And whenever we are more aware that we are bringing ourselves into things, into relationships, it'll be a lot easier to be patient because we will be more proactive about what we are bringing into the relationship. It won't be so unconscious and just guided by habits and patterns from the past. In any relationship, we can practice taking on the perspective also of the other person. we can practice being more aware of our own interpretation, and also to then switch into the perspective of the other person and see what are they most likely feeling right now, what's going through their mind, what are they bringing into the relationship due to their past that may be troubling them. That way we can practice having empathy and wishing the other person well instead of being impatient with their behavior that, if we're stuck in our own perspective, doesn't correspond with the way things should be because we see the real nature of this issue. But no, the other person has their own perspective. And like in this example, their perspective has its own history and logic and reality to it. So by imposing our own interpretation of situations onto other people, we are putting pressure into relationships and tension. And that tension comes back to us, and that makes us impatient. And we can also practice looking at the whole situation from the perspective of a neutral observer. Someone who is able to see both people, both perspectives, and the issue, doesn't have any stakes in the situation themselves. And then we can ask ourselves, what would someone who sees what's going on right now from the outside, what would they notice? What might they recommend? And by being able to flexibly switch from perspective to perspective, we gain a more complete picture of the situation and a deeper understanding of what's going on. And that really, really helps with being patient with ourselves, because we know that we have our own history that is flowing into this situation and that we can't just switch off just like that. And also the other person, to understand where they're coming from. This helps us to disidentify from the illusion that our way of seeing things is the only and the correct way of seeing it. And the only reason other people are not complying to what we want is because they're being stubborn or unrealistic, which would make us impatient with them. Having discussed this, I want to now look at a few examples. So I'll be going through a few examples of situations where two people have a misunderstanding, a conflict, and how this switch between perspectives can help them resolve the situation and be more patient with one another. I've decided to call the person of our first example Fred, who has a 5-year-old child, and he repeatedly gets impatient with the child whenever they leave the apartment in the morning. The child is just so slow, and whenever he requests it to speed up, it doesn't listen most of the time. He feels that the child is rejecting his authority and wondering if he's a bad parent. Then he asks himself, what would a neutral observer see in this situation? And he realizes that he's actually, because this is his first child, and he's never seen the average speed of a 5-year-old in the morning when leaving the apartment. And he wonders if maybe his child isn't being slow, but that this is just the normal speed of a 5-year-old. Taking on the perspective of the child, he realizes that perhaps the child isn't rebelling against him by not complying to his requests to speed up, but maybe on those days when the child is specifically slow, it just had a bad night's sleep. Or maybe there are some other more general issues that need to be looked at and resolved to figure out why the child, if this is an act of rebellion, why the child feels the need to assert its autonomy and will like that. In any case, Fred realizes that this situation doesn't mean that the child doesn't value him as a parent or that he is a bad parent. and distancing himself from these automatic, distorted interpretations and the corresponding emotions of anger and frustration helps him to be more patient with the situation. And seeing these alternative possible explanations sends him on a quest to figure out what is behind this repeated situation and find some lasting solutions for it. Another example, Susie and Arthur are a couple, and Susie is starting to feel impatient and upset because Arthur doesn't want to move in with her. Now she does this exercise to increase her relationship patience. She looks at her own projections and how her personal past may be influencing the situation and her interpretation of the situation, and realizes that due to her anxious attachment style, she's projecting rejection and abandonment into the relationship and onto Arthur when it's not there. She takes on the perspective of a neutral observer, asks herself what might a neutral observer recommend, and thinks to herself, maybe a neutral observer would comment that since the relationship isn't that old yet, they've only been dating a couple of months, it may make sense not to rush into things. Then she takes on Arthur's perspective, and she knows from the things that he's told her about his past that he's made challenging experiences with relationships in his life, and that he's working through commitment issues. And then another possibility, which she hasn't asked him about, but that keeps going through her mind and she wants to ask him about the next opportunity she gets, is that maybe he isn't, as she's fearing, attracted enough to her. But she realizes that that says nothing about her own worth as a person. Her worth is given independently of Arthur's attraction to her. And she realizes that putting pressure on him and being impatient won't make her feel more self-worth and won't improve the relationship. Example number 3. Paul's parents want him to study engineering, but he's been interested in literature for quite some time. Whenever the issue comes up, the tension in the room goes from 0 to 100, and Paul is growing more and more impatient with his parents because the deadline for sending out college applications is approaching, and he just wishes that they would stop being so closed-minded about it. Then one evening he gives it a lot of thought and takes on the perspective of his parents and wonders if perhaps they're not being closed-minded but worried about his future and if he will be able to support a family on a liberal arts degree because his father struggled with that. And taking on the perspective of a neutral observer, he notices that they never actually really had a long conversation about it and that he never had the chance to share what he found when he did some research about job prospects for literature majors and what his plans were. Also, he realizes that his demand for his parents' approval and his assumption that he depended on that for this choice was putting a lot of pressure on the situation. And he came to the decision that ultimately, although it would be a lot easier if his parents did approve of his choice, him being able to live his life and walk his path didn't depend on it. And with this more wholesome view of the situation, he felt hopeful about the outcome of a conversation and started talking to them about it and expressed a lot of empathy and understanding for their perspective. So his patience, his broader perspective on the situation made him more patient, and that also influenced his behavior in the relationship and conversation. And all the while, he patiently knew that ultimately his choice didn't depend on his parents' approval. A final example. Anne is the team lead of a large team of 20 people, and one day she got another critical feedback, went home feeling dejected, and she told her partner, I don't think they want me as a team lead anymore. They keep giving me critical feedback. They think that I'm the reason for all of our problems, and I think they want someone else to be the team lead. And then she remembers this exercise and asks herself what she may be bringing into the situation from her past, and perhaps her fear of not being wanted that comes from her past is being triggered in this situation. And that this feeling that she isn't wanted is perhaps not based on the majority opinion of her team, but this strong feeling is coming from her past. She takes on the perspective of a neutral observer and wonders, because she doesn't have that much leadership experience yet. So perhaps the way things are and the amount of critical feedback she's getting is just the way it is when you're in a leadership position. And perhaps people in general aren't that aware of balancing critical feedback with expressing appreciation, even though they have appreciation. And so she decides she wants to talk to someone about that, who has more experience or knows how teams function. And then she takes on the perspective of the team and rummages through her memory and finds situations in which they have expressed deep appreciation for her work. And she wonders, perhaps the reason they're expressing critical feedback is to help me, so that we experience less stress as a team and can function even better. And after seeing the situation from all of these perspectives, she feels encouraged and more patient with herself, with the team, and the whole situation, and decides that she does want to trust in her capability and aptitude as a team lead and keep doing that work. In summary, the benefit of this exercise is that it helps us untangle facts from interpretations. We can find out where certain responsibilities lie. We can take responsibility for our part and give responsibility back for the things that the other person is responsible for. We can step out of this view of seeing ourselves as a victim that doesn't have any agency and is being forced into something. It helps you realize that you and the other person are on equal footing. You're existential equals, and you have the right to co-create the relationship. You have the same rights as the other person in the relationship, and you're not at the mercy of their expectations. Things can be discussed. And then you can stop projecting onto them that they're attacking you, your self-worth, your autonomy, your peace or contentment. And in that way, it'll be a lot easier to have empathy for them and patience with them. I hope this explanation helps. Let me know if you have any further questions. Like always, thanks for watching, and consider subscribing if you're new here. And remember to increase your relationship patience by taking on a more wholesome view of the whole situation, by becoming more mindful of your own interpretation of things and your own projections and things that you're bringing into the relationship, by becoming more mindful of the other person's perspective, and by consulting that neutral observer and seeing what they may have to offer as advice or further information on the situation.